Hey, hey.
Do you all see a big screen with my granddaughter on it?
Yeah, we do.
Gorgeous.
We do.
All right.
He's
Well,
a kitty.
let me go ahead and get started. I am reading from some notes, but I'm trying to look into the camera here as I read. So, and we're going to go, I know I can't always see questions. I think Chuck might keep track of them, but I have some key spots picked where I'll stop and say, does anyone have any questions? So let's go ahead and get started. Good morning. My name's Chris Summers, and it's my pleasure to host this workshop on photographing children. Today, I'll be covering some of the techniques and ideas for making better portraits of children, and I'll be showing you examples of my work with images from babies to teenagers. The images I'll share were shot in a variety of locations, from studio settings in my home and other locations, under natural and artificial light. They'll include not only posed studio-style portraits, but everyday candids showing kids just being kids. I'll be covering the equipment that I use and suggest cameras, lenses, lighting, and other things to make your portraits come out better. We'll finish up by talking about some of the basic things to consider in post-processing. One thing I hope you can take away from this workshop is that even though the shots I will show you were quite often taken in a studio setting with professional strobes, you could easily do this with natural light. The lighting principles I'll show you are the same. I should add that this is my granddaughter, Emily. She was 9 years old when I took this, and we'll be seeing more of her during this presentation. It seems that I've been photographing children for such a long time. I guess I really have. My own children were my first subjects. Then many kids of all ages who were models I shot professionally for catalogs and ads. And now that my children are grown and have families of their own, I often photograph my grandchildren. And I seem to have no shortage of them, 20 so far, with number 21 on the way next March, and our first great-grandchild will be coming in April. Okay, so this first shot is an old black and white image of my oldest son, Colin. To give you an idea of how long ago I shot this portrait, he just turned 40 years old in September. As best as I can recall, it was shot with a Nikon F camera, probably on +X pan film, and I printed it in my darkroom in about 1982. We had a little apartment out on Beechnut Road in Alief. I don't know if any of you remember, but that was in 1980. Everybody moved out to Beechnut Road. It seemed like there were lots of apartments out there. Now I wouldn't live there for anything. Anyway, we had this little apartment, and this was shot in our living room using just the light from a window. Okay, let's spend some time and talk about the type of gear that can help you get the best portraits. Most of us are probably shooting with DSL cameras that have a dedicated viewfinder and interchangeable lenses. And many are now using mirrorless cameras, which quite often look like DSLR cameras, but instead of a prism and a mirror inside, they have an electronic viewfinder. But quite often, they will also have interchangeable lenses. There's no reason you can't use a simple point-and-shoot camera or even a smartphone. Many of the latest phones take excellent pictures, but you might be limited on how big an enlargement you can make. And I'm going to show you an example in a minute of DSLR versus smartphone. Quite often, our cameras come with a zoom lens, or maybe you might purchase one later on. It's probably best to have a lens that's a mid-range to telephoto. A 24-70 is a common kit lens, and it's a good choice, although you'll probably have to be shooting more in the 50 to 70 millimeter range for portraits. I also like a 70 to 200 millimeter lens, as it really helps fill the frame without causing any wide-angle distortion on your subjects. And you'll be able to have a more out-of-focus background with a lens like this. You might also consider a prime lens. I have two favorites, my Canon 85mm f1.2, which you'll be seeing quite a few examples of it in use, as well as a Sigma 135mm f1.8 art lens. The art is a special designation I'll talk about a little bit later. And lenses that are fairly fast or more wide open aperture are ideal as they limit the depth of field. In classical camera portraiture, you usually want the subject to be sharp from the tip of the nose to the ears and then have the focus fall off. Just keep in mind when shooting with a fast lens like that, if you have more than one subject, you'll need to have enough depth of field for both subjects to be in focus. I like to shoot with a tripod for most portraiture, It goes back to when I often had to shoot to a layout or an ad for an ad or a magazine cover where type might be around it. And Emily just mentioned about the magazine for the local photographs. Quite often it's going to be a vertical with type around it. I feel it ensures I won't have any camera shake and the horizon lines will be straight. And keep in mind, it was only in the past few years that cameras and lenses offered some kind of image stabilization. And even today, not every lens or camera has this feature. As for lighting sources, you can't do much better than soft, natural light. It's plentiful and it doesn't cost a dime. But you can also consider flash or strobe, or even the newer LED type lights. And we'll talk about more of these in just a little bit. Okay, here's that quick example of DSLR versus smartphone. This is my grandson, Ronan. The shot on the left was taken with a Canon 5DS, which has a huge 52 megapixel sensor. It produces super sharp, detailed images that could be blown up quite large. I took it indoors with an LED light source. The one on the right was taken on the same visit to my daughter's house, only outside in the garden, and it was taken with my LG smartphone. Both are nice shots, but the one on the right is much smaller image, so you'd not be able to enlarge it or do much with it if you wanted to see more detail. It doesn't have the tonal range of the one taken with the DSLR. It's still a cute shot, though. So what's in my kit? Well, as for cameras, I decided when I moved over to digital from film to go with Canon, and I've owned about 7 different models going back to the Canon 10D. I just happen to choose Canon. There are so many excellent brands to choose from now. Currently, I own the 7D Mark II on the left, and that is Canon's APS-C sensor. It's about 1.6 times smaller than a full frame camera, so it's slightly reduced. I use it more for sports and wildlife, but there's no reason that with the right lens, it could not make an excellent portrait camera. The small one in the middle is a Canon M5. And the M series was Canon's first attempt at mirrorless cameras, and it's also an APS-C sensor. It's very similar in a lot of its specifications to the 7D. And I like to use this camera often when I'm traveling, and weight and the size of my bag is important. The Canon M has its own line of lenses, but with a special lens adapter, I can use any of my regular Canon EF mount lenses. The camera on the right is my new favorite, the Canon R. It's a full frame mirrorless. I really like this. It has a 30 megapixel sensor, produces excellent quality images. And they have their own line of lenses also, but with the adapter, I can use any of my EF lenses, and I have quite a few of those. We're going to talk here a little bit about lenses that I might use for portraits. And I'm using them as examples more of their focal length, not brand specific for any reason. And from left to right, we have a Tokino 100 millimeter f2.8 macro lens. It's not my usual choice, but it would work fine. It's a medium length focal length and fairly bright. I included it because you might own a similar lens and you might not think that a macro lens could be a good choice, but it certainly can be. Next is a zoom lens, a Tamron 18-400. Offers a lot of zoom range and it can work, but it is a little bit slower lens. It's a 3.5 to 6.3, so I prefer a faster lens if I can use it. In the middle is my Sigma 135 art lens, one of my favorites, super sharp, bright. The art designation is Sigma's line of lenses that signify the highest quality with wide lens openings and exceptional focal plane sharpness. They are heavy though, that's one drawback. It's a big piece of glass. Then in front with the red stripe is the Canon 85 millimeter f1.2. Great focal length, super bright, low light, and very sharp. And I actually have on the bottom there, you can see if it looks a little tall, that's actually the adapter for the RF mount if I want to shoot with that camera. So it makes it stick out just a little bit more. Last lens on the right is a 70-200. It happens to be a Tamron here. It's a great focal length, like I said, f2.8. It's very bright. I shoot almost all my portraits, as I said, using a tripod. I've owned a lot of tripods in my life, from really inexpensive ones to high-end carbon fiber models. A tripod will ensure sharpness and a level camera. It also makes things like checking the rear LCD screen for the histogram or composition easier, because I can just step back. I don't have to reposition the camera and then recompose. I happen to like the Enduro brand of tripods. I own a couple models, a monopod, ball heads, gimbal head. This is actually a pan head, which I actually like a lot for portraiture. And I still use this little thing on top that's a Sackler quick release. It came out before the Arca Swiss mounts did, and I'm still sort of partial to it. They're mainly known, Sackler's mainly known for video cameras. Most of your professional high-end video cameras use Sackler mounts, and they decided to make one for 35mm cameras, and I own several of them, so it's what I use, but I think a quick release, my point is a good thing to have. It makes it easy to get the camera on and off without fumbling with it. Regular on-camera flashes or speed lights have come a long way. I can remember many years ago my dad using a flash gun and having to change out the spent bulbs after each shot. New flashes have a fantastic array of settings. They can be fired wirelessly. You can adjust the flash output to match the camera settings. There's also a wide variety of diffusers and reflectors for most flash units. I own this Canon flash, but I'm going to be honest, I actually don't use it a whole lot. I tend to try and be more of a natural light photographer. And if I'm doing a post-portrait studio type shot, I have professional strobes that I just choose to use. That being said, a lot of photographers, both amateur and professional, use these to light their subjects, especially when on location. And they're especially popular with wedding and event photographers.
Can I say something?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if people realize that when if you have your strobe set on automatic, that every time that light flashes, it actually flashes 2 times. The first time to go out and then read the amount of light coming back in, and then it does the actual flash for the picture.
Yeah, they've become quite sophisticated over the years. When I shoot with studio type strobes, I use these mono heads. They're made in Japan by a company called Comet, which sadly is now out of business, so I'm not sure what I'll do if I ever need parts or repairs. These are measured in watt seconds, and I have 2 600 watt second models and a 300 watt second. Well, I'm not going to go into the physics of a watt second, but they put out quite a bright light. These are very adjustable, but they're still fairly bright. And I use the typical softbox diffusers that attach with a speed ring to the front of the strobe. The only drawback is you're going to need an AC electricity, and they can be a bit heavy to take on location. There are many other very affordable strobe brands. If you decide to get something like a mono head, you'll see them on eBay or at some of the major camera suppliers or Amazon. But it's important to use an umbrella or a softbox or something to diffuse the lighting a little to make it softer. These are my newest addition to my lighting bag of tricks, LED lights. They're very small, yet quite powerful for portraits. These ones are made by Dracast. They run on rechargeable batteries or AC power. They come with barn doors to control the light, but I also recently got the softbox diffuser you see on the right there. That really helps to soften and spread out the light. You can also vary the power and the color temperature on these. Okay, any questions so far?
Chris, barn doors, explain.
Okay, and unfortunately I didn't take a picture of it with the barn doors. So it really is kind of a funny old saying because we think of the big barn doors. Basically, in the front of the light source, they have a frame with 4 little flaps that can be adjusted. So you can control the lighting if you're using a hard light. And these lights actually come with a piece of diffusion plastic in there, which you can remove if you want a harder light, or you can put the plastic, the white translucent plastic in. But even having a softbox, if you look at that shot on the right, you can sort of make out a square, but it's softened. And with these softboxes, actually the barn doors are wide open, so it makes like a frame that helps hold the box on there. That's the way it attaches.
Yeah.
It's kind of an old term, though. Yeah, I have to remember when there were barns. Okay. Well, when we talk about photographing children, I guess we should start with babies. So here we'll cover babies from newborns to toddlers and beyond. And for Steve, this is a timely topic, I think. I'll tell you up front that I won't be showing you any pictures like the well-known photographer Ann Geddes takes. I think you know what I mean. Pictures of a sleeping baby curled up in the center of a large seashell. or dressed in a costume, sitting on a big mushroom in the forest with stardust floating around. She does take do some incredible work. She takes incredible pictures. I have never taken a picture like that, though. This is my granddaughter, Caitlin. She's about 2 months old here. And at this age, she was able to hold her head up and look around, and that's about it. So here, I propped her on a couch, leaning on a big cushion. There was a large window to my left, soft light, which gives the catch light in her eyes. I decided when I edited this to change it to a black and white because the pillow, which you can sort of tell over here, it's a bright red plaid, and I forget what she was wearing in her outfit, but it did not go very well. So I changed it to a black and white. This is my daughter Deirdre and granddaughter Caitlin, who we just saw in the previous shot. And I wanted to get some nice shots of the two of them, mother and daughter shots. And as I said before, babies this young aren't capable of much on their own, so mom holding her was perfect. It was February up in Seattle. We were visiting my other daughter, and it was typical cold, dreary day, which you get a lot of up in Seattle in the wintertime. There was a big bay window inside the family room. It made a good spot for portraits, so I decided to shoot indoors. And when we started setting it up, I realized that those dividers in the window behind them are rather distracting. So I pulled the sheer curtain. You can see the sheer curtains on either side across, and it really helps subdue the harsh lines. And you'll see this in the next few images I'm going to show you. So it's important to look around at the area around your subject and try to make adjustments if possible to improve the shot.
I've also found that I had some friends that want pictures of their newborn. Newborns don't do anything. They don't smile. You're lucky if they're awake. You know, it really takes a couple of months before you can get a decent shot of a baby.
It's challenging. I had this idea for my daughter not to be looking into the lens, but looking at her daughter. So we tried several poses. The baby was happy, and I kept encouraging my daughter to interact with Caitlin. I shot this series of portraits with a Canon 5D Mark II and a Tamron 24 to 70 millimeter f2.8 lens. The shot was set at about 50 millimeter range with the zoom, and I did about a 200th of a second at f5. The ISO was 400, remember? This is shot only with natural window light. Finally, I got the pose I really liked. There was just a feeling of love here between the mother and daughter, and I chose this bottom right shot, and I did some cropping. The orange curtain to the right was a major distraction, as was the window glass to the left, so I cropped it into a square. The aperture gave me ample depth of field, basically from my daughter's shoulder to in the foreground to just behind her ear, and the baby was very sharp, being in the focal plane. I also shot this using the camera's spot meter mode due to the strong backlighting. So choosing a different metering mode is something you really need to consider on a case-by-case basis. And that's another reason it's important to know your camera and what different settings you can do. There's still something I didn't like. The shot was full of neutral tones, except I just didn't really like the baby's green outfit for some reason with the warm tones in the skin. So I converted it to a black and white. I added a slight sepia tone to give it its own warmth. And it's one of my all-time favorite shots I've done with like a mother-child portrait. It has good dynamic range. The areas in the shadows are close to true black. Highlights are good without being blown out. Lots of tonal range in the skin tones. And as I said, the focus is good. The faces of both my daughter and her daughter are tack sharp. I mainly do edits in Lightroom or Photoshop, but sometimes I use other plugin programs for things like black and white conversions. This is actually from an old program that On One Software made about 10 years ago called Perfect Black and White. And I have a copy of it, and for some reason I just like the presets are very good. And the only other thing I did was you can tell I put a little vignette to just sort of pull you into the picture there of mother and daughter.
What were the settings again, Chris?
You know,
ISO,
let me go
ISO
back.
4. I'm sorry, ISO
yeah,
400.
it was ISO 400 and about 52 millimeters and a 200th at f5. So all in all, very usable. I probably could have even handheld at a 200th of a second, but as I said, I'm kind of funny and I chose to shoot with a tripod. It always, my wife always knows when we pack for the trip, she has the bigger suitcase and it's like, she goes, "Do you want me to carry your tripod?" I'm like, "Yeah."
So Chris, you said you were using a 70 to 200 lens on this?
No, this was a 24 to 70.
Oh, okay.
So which is typically, a lot of times your kit lens is like that, or there's usually an 18 to 105 or something like that. So that's in that range.
Okay.
And I've found if you're going to take a lot of strobe pictures, that if you have your ISO at 400, your batteries last a lot longer.
Oh yeah, especially with a battery operated flash. Yeah. So this is my grandson Owen, and he came to visit us when he was 3 or 4 months old. He's a bit older than Caitlin was. Babies at this age are starting to attempt to crawl, but they usually can't sit up on their own, so they do need some support. They can hold their heads up more and are a lot more alert and active. For this picture, I used the king-size bed in our bedroom for a location. I put down this off-white quilted bedspread on top of a pillow, which gives him something to lean on, and I hung a white bed sheet behind him using some background stands. I was shooting with my studio strobes and softbox diffusers. One to the left was skimming across the bed sheet in the background, and the key light was to my right. I also had a small reflector to my left. But there's no reason you couldn't use natural light if it was available for a shot like this. Now, I blew this shot up, and I'm bringing in my pointer just so you can see in the eyes here. You can clearly see the key light. Here's a little reflector on this side. I'm right in the middle, and Mom is probably over my right shoulder getting his attention. And that's something that is really helpful if you can have a family member maybe with a squeaky toy or just to get their attention for it. This was also shot with an 85mm f1.2 lens, but because I was using studio strobes, this was shot at f11, and they are much brighter, so they put out a lot of light. But it made sure he's super sharp. You can actually start to see a few wrinkles in the background, that sheet I hung up, but it's not distracting in any way. Babies don't sit still very long, so we took breaks and we did some outfit changes. For a change-up, I decided to try some shots using some black velvet underneath him and also behind as the background. This was actually shot on our dining room table. The lighting was a bit different. We switched it around a little. Key light was to my left, fill card to the right. And instead of having a background light on the background, because I wanted it to go black, I turned the background to hit the side of his face. This is what we sometimes call a rim light or a kicker light, and it gives some separation there on that shadow side of his face, and just makes him kind of pop off the background. Same lens and similar settings as the previous shots, and this was, I think, ISO 50 for all of these, so it's the lowest that camera would go to. This is yet another granddaughter. This is Adeline, and she's one of Owen's little sisters, and she's also a twin. I was helping my son and his family move cross-country from Pennsylvania to Idaho a couple years ago, and it took several days as they had 4 small kids and a dog, and we were driving 2 vehicles, pulling trailers, and to top it all off, my daughter-in-law was breastfeeding the twins at that point, so there were a lot of stops along the way. One morning during the trip, my daughter-in-law texted me that she and Adeline were awake and up, but the boys were all asleep, and she asked if I would watch the baby while she took a shower. So I said, sure. So she brought Adeline to my room. She was wide awake, and she'd been fed, and she was happy. So I set up a quick shot on the hotel bed. I put some white pillows standing up behind her against the wall, and I had her lean on an extra pillow in front of her. Adeline and I got along really well, and trust is a big part of shooting babies. So she had no problem posing for a few shots. She thought it was great fun. We used natural window lighting in the bedroom to light her face. That's all just from the big window next to the bed. And the light on the background is actually from the LED bedside lamp. It was an LED bulb, and apparently it was pretty well balanced for daylight. 20 minutes or so of shooting. I had a few nice portraits. Okay, here's Owen again, and now he's 9 months old. He's able to sit up on his own. He crawls, but he doesn't walk yet, so he's still somewhat of a captive subject. I took these up in Washington State, not far from Seattle. We went to a local park, and as I recall, there were dark clouds in the distance and storms moving in. So it's typical of Seattle. We only had about 30 minutes to shoot. In the shot on the left, he's sitting at the bottom of the slide. He loved slides. His mother, if she helped him, he could safely slide down. So I got this of him sitting at the bottom of the slide. And if you look closely, here's Mom's hand snuck in, kind of holding him. If I hadn't told you, you might not have even noticed because it kind of blends in there with the slide. Nearby was this nice patch of grass with all these little white flowers. So we set him there. I got about 20 shots off before the rain hit and we had to leave. And as you can see on the shot on the right, the depth of field is about from his shoe to his hand back here. So it's got beautiful fall off both in front and in back, and you really get a feeling for what the depth of field is in this shot based on that grass. Again, the 85 millimeter was a good choice for these shots. This is Augustus, and he was one chunky little baby. He's about 5 months old in these shots, and as you can tell in the shot on the left, he was teething. So there was slobber all over. I set him on our coffee table in our family room with a white poster board behind him. I used one, what I call softbox diffuser or key light, right above my camera and myself, and it was a studio strobe type light. And if you look at the shot on the left here, those are my son's hands holding him so he doesn't topple over, because like I said, babies don't sit up very long at this stage. The colors weren't that great, so I decided to just, again, do a black and white, and I love the way he picked his arm up, and I got this shot. The arm covers all the wet stuff on his shirt. But you can see also, if you look in here at the catch light, again, it's just over my left shoulder, nice box light, and that leaves room on my right shoulder for his mother, who had a little squeaky toy and was getting his attention. This is just a grab shot of my grandson, Ethan, having a bath in the kitchen sink, shot under typical tungsten kitchen overhead lighting, so your backgrounds don't have to be fancy. Again, 85 millimeter lens, 320th of a second, wide open, f1.2, so it's very little depth of field. The ISO is 400. I focused basically on his nose and eyes to get this shot, and it's just a cute little everyday shot. This is my wife, Sarah, holding her namesake, Sarah. We used to refer to her as little Sarah, but now she's almost 14, so I guess I won't be able to do that much longer. Maybe I should just refer to my wife as old Sarah. Well, maybe not. She was about 13 months old here, so she's a toddler.
I wouldn't recommend old.
Yeah. I told that to my wife. She thought she was amused. So she was about 13 months old. My wife just happened to pick her up as she was wandering around our background. She's a toddler here. And sometimes it seems babies' eyes are almost oversized for their little heads, but they're really beautiful. They're great focal point. And as you can see, depth of field is limited, so I'm mainly focused on my granddaughter. I shot this with an 85 millimeter lens at f2.5, and as you can see, the focal plane's quite narrow, but I like it this way. No offense to my wife, but she's more of a prop or an accessory to the portrait of our granddaughter here. And then I got this shot. Depth of field is limited, but I like the way that the baby's tack sharp with those big eyes, and my wife is just falling off in focus. It puts emphasis on the baby and the big blue eyes, which, by the way, have turned green now as she got older. Are there any more questions so far?
Any questions?
Not, I'll proceed.
Do you put, my brain's gone dead, where you darken the corners?
Oh, I might have,
Vignetting?
I almost always put a little vignette in portraits,
Vignette.
and it goes back to when I was, years ago when you were in the darkroom, we would, to do a vignette, you usually dodge the center area. We used to get coat hanger wire and cut out a little piece of cardboard, and in the darkroom, you'd put it under the lens and you'd kind of dodge that area and or burn, hold back the light on it, making the outer part go darker. It's so much easier in Lightroom because you just dial and it changes.
Chris?
Chris, I got a question here. When you're shooting the 85 millimeter, are you using a crop sensor? Is that?
No, those were most likely, for a long time I shot with a Canon 5D Mark II. And before I went to the 5DS, which now I've gone to the R. So those were always my full frame cameras. So
When you're talking millimeters on the lenses, you're typically talking the full frame equivalent.
yeah, I'm giving you what I would see, well, and what I saw in the metadata. So if not many of these were shot crop sensor, I might show you some later on that were.
Okay, all right.
And I'll point
Chris,
that
I
out.
have a question.
Sure.
So on that last shot with your granddaughter and your wife, and then the shot in the bathtub, was that just spontaneous, or did you use a tripod on both of those?
No, I actually, okay, good, very good question. I did not have a tripod because we just, for both of, well, the shot, I just happened to walk in the kitchen and my daughter-in-law was giving the baby a bath in the sink, which many of us parents have done when they're small enough. It's an easy place. You don't have to bend over. And then the shot in the backyard, I just almost always have a camera when the grandkids come. I've often said, you know, when I'm dead and gone, they're just going to remember this old man that used to take pictures of them all the time. So.
Okay, so there is some spontaneity then in your.
Yes, and I should have pointed out earlier. If you're planning a shot, you know, maybe it's better to use a tripod if you really want to think about your shot. But obviously, when we're out with cameras, you just sometimes grab a shot, take a picture.
Chuck, I'm Chris.
Yes.
How about metering? Are you using spot metering on these where you're getting very close to the face and one?
No, you know, I find Canon and I'm sure Nikon, everyone has a different name for it, but the one that looks like a little circle with a dot in the center, kind of mixed matrix metering or whatever they call it, I use that almost all the time. The only shot that I know I specifically used spot metering on was that one of my daughter where there was strong backlighting at the back. But for all these, typically, it's just whatever that averaging metering, it seems to do pretty well.
I think it's evaluative.
Yeah.
About metering, right.
They all have some little funny name. That's the fun thing about camera companies. They all want to name it something different. So.
I think Nikon calls it matrix metering or something.
Yeah,
like that.
I remember that from my Nikon film days. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Chris. What is that called again?
Oh, go ahead.
What is that called again? That you said you the little circle and the dot.
I think it's as Steve said. I think it's called evaluative metering, and it's just it's their averaging. It averages the center versus what's around the center.
That's Canon's term.
Yeah, that's
right.
Canon's term for
And
it.
then Nikon uses matrix.
But when you're metering, you need to keep in mind the colors of the person that you're metering. If they're wearing a dark shirt, then the average is going to say, oh, this is a dark picture, and it's going to increase the exposure, and you'll end up with it a little washed out. If they're wearing white, it's going to think, oh, it's really bright, and it's going to do the opposite. So on that averaging, you've got to keep in mind what they're wearing.
Well, and that's a good reason to, if you have a camera, most of them have a histogram you can bring up on the back, or even the little preview that it brings up. You can often at least go, oh, I might need to bump the exposure this way or that way.
Yeah. You do look at the histogram, then that's good.
Yes. Well, I do when I'm not shooting quickly, but often when I'm setting shots up, I will definitely look at that. Okay, on to some of our parks. We have some great parks for doing family portraits. Caitlin has gotten bigger since we last saw her, and I took these shots of her and her mother down at East End Park. And there's a big meadow up in the front of the park, and there's a little bridge that crosses a culvert. And it was just a perfect place for her to practice some walking. Mom was nearby to make sure she didn't fall off or something. And she's about a year old at this time. The light is partly shaded here by trees. It can be a little challenging on a bright sunny day. But as I recall, this was shot in February, late afternoon, kind of overcast, our typical winter weather. I shot this with the lens wide open. And you can see in the shot on the right how the boards here show the depth of field. It's basically from about her toe back, maybe it's about a foot of depth of field in that shot, which is just perfect. The background falls out of focus nicely. I also used, for these shots, Canon has a thing called AI servo focus mode, which is Canon's term for continuous focus that follows action as it moves closer or farther away. Most brands have a feature like this, but it's going to be called something different. I think Nikon has they don't call it AI servo, they have another name for it, but it's just one of those camera settings, and this is why it's important to make sure you learn how to use your camera and brand specific what they do. The other thing is Canon has this little feature called facial tracking, and I had it set to this within this AI server mode. And what it does is it actually will find the face. It looks for eyes and nose and a mouth, and it helps you follow the focus without having to do much other than compose and take pictures.
Chris,
Yes.
so are you shooting an aperture priority here?
No, I'm just shooting, when I'm shooting like this, as long as there's not something like a need for a special shutter speed or aperture, I often shoot in just the basic, they call it P mode on a Canon, program mode.
Okay.
If I roll, and I'll show you some a little later, taken at a swimming pool where I wanted to freeze action, and I specifically told it I want a fast shutter speed. But normally I'm just, there's a lot of latitude if you use a program like Lightroom or most good editing programs, that unless your shot's really exposed off exposure, you can usually pull something out of it. I do shoot in RAW for everything. Okay, neighborhood parks are also great locations. I think Emily mentioned this, and we have granddaughters, Sarah and Emily are in this shot, and they're at South Woodland Hills Playground out by the swimming pool. Playground equipment, great for portraits. You've got steps and slides and ladders, and they all work well for posing. And with this shot, because they both had these sort of mismatched purple shirts on, I decided, hey, black and white with a little sepia tone, just nice for portraits. These are casual, almost editorial portraits. It was September, and as you can imagine, it was still hot and humid, and their hair was a bit out of control, but that's okay for this type of portrait. It's not supposed to be a fancy posed portrait. These are just grab shots at the playground. And we walked there from my house, and they almost always knew, Grandpa's going to bring a camera along. So. Okay, here's where we talk about shutter speed. Our swimming pools give some great options for shots, and I must have tried to get this shot about 50 times. This was the best one I got. My daughter-in-law had suggested this group shot of her kids, and she was in the pool with my wife in front of giving instructions, and each time she'd say, okay, on your mark, 1, 2, 3, go. And as you can see, they all jumped at different times. But it makes for a really classic family portrait that will be remembered. I actually did one year for Christmas, I did one of these books that you can have, a coffee table book for my daughter-in-law and stepson, and it was all of their kids, and this was on the cover of the book. So shot with a 70 to 200 millimeter lens at about 70 millimeters. I was at 1/2500th of a second, and I love the little Brian in the center is doing the cannonball right in. Sarah seemed to have gotten behind. She wasn't ready to jump yet. So. Here's my grandson, Lane, and this is at South Woodland Hills Pool. He's about 5, and at the time, he was a very good swimmer. And he just popped up by the edge of the pool, and I was sitting there with the camera, 70 to 200 millimeter lens. It's important to fill your frame, come in as tight on a portrait like this, I think. It's a nice quality. Again, we get a lot of hazy days in the summer, so it was just nice soft lighting. We used to set up a small pool in our backyard several years ago, and it was especially nice for when the local pool was closed or too crowded. And all these shots have a couple of similarities. Again, light, soft overcast, almost hazy, so there's no harsh shadows. The other thing that's important is I got down at a low angle to get these shots. I'm not shooting down on them. I'm shooting from their level. And I like the variety of expressions. I used to set a small tub of water, like a wash tub, for them to dip their feet in so they didn't bring grass clippings into the pool. I didn't have to change the water out that much. And Sarah thought it was her own personal swimming pool. I have no idea why my grandson has that sad face, but he had 3 sisters to deal with, so that might have been it. And as you can see, they're all hams in front of the camera. They've kind of grown up accustomed to me taking pictures, and they like to pose for me. This is a nice portrait of Emily at the pool, and I just love how she's looking right into the camera. She's got those sharp, crisp beads of water on her face, and check out these pruny fingers. How many kids, you see them in the pool, and when they get out, their hands are just wilted from being in the water for so many hours. Shooting kids outdoors doesn't have to be fancy. Your backyard can work great as a location. As I've said before, the important thing is to get down on their level and shoot. And for a lot of these shots, I just pull up a lawn chair and I sit back with a longer telephoto, usually a 70 to 200. They don't tend to even notice I'm taking pictures of them. And sprinklers, that's another good suggestion. They're great for kids outside in the summertime. Get some nice action shots. I love this shot of my dog, my last Labrador. I think she didn't realize Sarah was going to stand on the sprinkler and spray everybody. Here we see Sarah at work with a toy, little bubble gun, or gun that blows bubbles. And you can see her imagination's hard at work. Bubble toys like this, or those wands that make bubbles, are great for getting kids to give poses without you even asking. There's just something about how bubbles capture their imaginations. So just sit back and snap away. Here we have some of my grandchildren that we've seen before, and they're all growing up right before our eyes. These are pictures of what I call kids just being kids, having fun, playing, using their imagination. They're playing with toys, or they're doing dress up. I almost always get shots of the kids around Halloween when they have costumes on, and it's really a great opportunity for good portraits. Both of these shots are just examples of outdoor portraits taken with longer prime lenses. I know I've showed a lot of shots taken in the slightly overcast lighting we spoke about, but the shot of Ronan on the right was taken in a park about an hour before sunset. So even though it's full sun and a low angle, I think it's got real pleasing results. There's a real sparkle in his expression. Just about every year, we go to the Texas Renaissance Festival over in Magnolia. The kids always get their faces painted. It's one of the first things they do, and it's a great opportunity to get some poses with colorful makeup. These are examples of pictures with what I call a specialty lens that produces what I'd refer to as artistic images. It's called the Composer, and it's made by Lens Baby. I forgot to include it in my previous shot of the lenses I use, but it produces a sort of dreamy look where the focus falls off towards the edges, and you can vary this by the aperture. A wide open aperture will give you the softest edges. And the Composer has different lens element modules you can swap out. So I have a 50 millimeter f2.5 and a 35 millimeter f2.2. Both make good pictures. The Composer also has sort of a ball joint right in front of the lens mount, and you can sort of twist and angle the lens itself to kind of move the blur around or play with the composition. It's kind of a fun lens to experiment with. They're not that expensive. I think I got this used for about $200 with the elements. So just sort of fun for a different look. And what child doesn't like to play with water? These were up in Alaska, and I bought the fireman costume at Costco before going up there. If you've been to Costco, you've probably seen they were selling these again every year before Halloween. They have lots of costumes. And in the small village where my son and his family lived, there were no shops like this. One little grocery store where you could pay $12 for a box of cereal. Anyway, so he was really excited to get these costumes. And he loved it. He loved the fireman's costume. I had him pick up the hose and pretend he was fighting a big fire. I took this when my granddaughters Sarah and Emily come to visit for a few days. And they used to do this a lot before they started elementary school and beyond. I think when I took this, Emily was down for her nap, and I had Sarah help me in the kitchen to make cookies. I put her on top of the counter, so I wouldn't be stepping on her, I guess. And I saw the makings for a good shot, and I grabbed my camera. So you can use any room in your home. And for anyone who's lived up in the front of Kingwood, they probably had these same ugly cabinets. These were all in the South Woodland Hills and Trailwood homes. We're since now changing them out.
It looked like that one was tough to get a good depth of field.
Yeah, and that's actually with the 85 millimeter lens, but you know, things are falling off behind her. Like you can see almost the back of her hair is getting soft, but she's sitting right next to the cabinets on the counter there.
Okay.
Expect the unexpected. We were shooting some nice family style portraits while I was up visiting my son with his family in Alaska. And it had rained almost every day. Where he lived, it rained a lot, not far from Juneau. And he actually lived near Glacier Bay National Park. And so one day it was partly cloudy outside. I said, oh, let's go outside and get some pictures. I found an old bench to use and we started shooting. Augustus was potty training, and all of a sudden he shouted he really had to go pee-pee. So with his parents' blessing, he ran over to the little shed where they stored their firewood, and he pulled down his pants to pee. His mother went over to assist, and I grabbed this cute shot. I literally turned around from where I was sitting and shot this. I love the expression on the mother's face. She's a little embarrassed, I think. And by the way, I should add, these shots that I show from up in Alaska, that was a good case where I saved space and weight by using the little Canon M series, which is a smaller camera to hold. But the nice thing is it takes the different lenses. So I actually took the bigger lenses in the bag with the adapter and was able to shoot it. I put more emphasis on the glass, and the camera did what it was smaller, but it did what I needed it to do. This was shot behind their home while we were out picking some wild blueberries. And as I can say from experience, that if you take young children to pick berries like these, you probably will not have many berries left when you get home. And again, this was shot with the M5 and that big Sigma 135 millimeter lens, but I love the fall off. The woods, the forest has just gone really soft behind him. So you get lots of expressions from, and just a variety of looks from different children. This is Kirsten. And it was taken several years ago. The kids had come over with her siblings, and they were dyeing Easter eggs. And this was taken in our kitchen with just window lighting. We had like a bay window. Most of these houses seem to have in the area where the kitchen table is. And I just used the natural lighting, 5D Mark II, 85 millimeter lens. I love how the big eyes, and just, she was probably about 6 years old when I took this. She's now finishing her high school year, or senior year. Here's an amusing expression I got from my granddaughter, Sarah, one day. Keep in mind, you don't have to just shoot pictures of smiling children. Kids have a wide range of emotions and expressions. And when I took this, we were walking back to the car after watching her older siblings at a soccer game. And when we got to the parking lot, I told her to stand at the curb because I had my arms full of camera and chairs that we've been sitting in. I said in my best adult voice, stay right here and don't move. I went to put the chairs in the car, and I turned around, and this was the look she was giving me. So I grabbed I had the camera. I think it was the 70 to 200 millimeter lens, because that's what I used for soccer pictures. And I just got this shot, and I just, I think of, what is it, Shakespeare? Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Definitely unhappy with Grandpa.
I love the way the iris comes out in that picture, in her eyes.
Yeah, yeah. And that was, just some basic editing. I did decide to do a black and white. I remember this top had all these, it looked kind of like those little Valentine hearts that with the messages that kids used to give out, and it was all these mix of colors that I didn't like. So I said, hey, black and white works for me. So. Okay, well, here we're going to move up a little in age. We're going to shoot, these are more studio sessions. I used to do these in my garage where I normally do woodworking and fix cars and stuff. Luckily, my garage is air conditioned and finished out pretty nicely, so it makes a good little studio if I move everything out of the way. We had the kids for a week in the spring. Parents were away, and I wanted to do some portraits and surprise them. And we even had to take them shopping because Mom had only packed some pretty ratty looking play clothes. And I like to let the kids be creative and do fun things. I usually start out with some basic poses where they're just looking at me and the camera and smiling. It kind of helps break the ice. And then I'll suggest things, and I'll get them to kind of give me some fun looks. And Lane just took to this. He's the older brother here with Brian, and he just started really clowning around, and we got some fun shots of them. Sarah was at an age, she's on the lower left, and she had no trouble posing for the camera. I was having a little trouble with Kirsten and Emily. They looked a little stiff, so I said, hey, let's do like a ring around the rosy shot, and she just loved twirling around her big sister. So these are just some fun, simple shots.
I have found that if you ask a child to smile, they look like they're getting ready to brush their teeth.
It's like, I always think it's like someone told them how to smile. I mean, smiling when it comes naturally, it's a very natural expression. But when you tell them to smile, it's like,
Yeah. So I just say something silly to them. If they're old enough, I'll ask them how many girlfriends or boyfriends they have, or what's their favorite thing to do. Anything that'll
Yeah.
get their mind off the fact that they're having their picture taken, but think of something happy, you know, or silly.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I was
And
going to say, Emily, I've been around you so much when you're shooting children. It works every time. You always say, how many boyfriends? Or what's your boyfriend's name? But you immediately get a big smile.
This little series illustrates what challenges you face with small children sometimes. And as I said, Emily was looking a little stiff and I was trying different things. So I said, hey, what if you just twirled around? So I showed her, and I stood there and twirled around, and she kind of looked at me like, okay. And then she did it a few times, and she got dizzy. She fell down, which seemed to really amuse her. And she did that again and again. And we kept trying, and I got some fun shots out of it, but I was looking for something a little bit more. And then I got this shot. She spun around, she stopped and laughed, and I clicked the shutter just before she plopped down. I like the shot because it's playful. It makes the viewer smile. And there's just a slight bit of motion. And I like the way that her back foot is sort of turned, like she's spinning on it. And I guess my point is that once kids get in front of the camera and you try different things, they will often lose any shyness or inhibition. And I was really touched because I did some pictures, which I'm going to show you one of this little girl, Emily, who's, you know, now 12 years old, and I did some this summer, and she actually wanted to recreate this shot because she loves this shot of her so much.
And I think it's nice that you show that even professional photographers don't take 100% perfect pictures.
Yeah, thank God for big SD cards and digital.
Yeah, I mean, you could get 2 out of 50 good. Hey.
Yeah. Yep, that's true. That's true. Okay, well, this is an old shot of my 5 children, and it was taken several years ago in my studio, probably around 1995 or so. And as you can see, the canvas background has been around for a long time because it's the same one that I bought in 1985, and an artist friend and I painted it with water-based paints and got a nice mottled look. I also told my kids when they were little during family portrait time that for every 10 good poses they gave me, they could do some funny ones. And in the end, I got some really good shots. My kids, as you can see, got very creative with their funny poses, but I still do this to this day when shooting kids. And it's similar to what Emily was suggesting. If you get them to do something funny, they might just then give you a nice natural smile. So here we have a mix of serious and funny expressions from Emily and Sarah that I've done over a couple of portrait sessions in the past. And, you know, most kids can cross their eyes. It often goes away as they age. Emily can still not only cross them, but she can move them in opposite directions. I keep thinking I need to take one of these pictures in when I have my eye exam and show the eye doctor, because that bottom right is almost scary there.
Yeah.
She can still do it. So. Here we have Kirsten. I wanted to just show you this to show how the colors change when you switch to black and white. I like the colors in the shot on the left. It's not a bad shot, but I also like the tonal range of the shot on the right. And that's the beauty of most software for editing. It gives us lots of choices. Back in the days of film, I would have had to shoot her both in black and white and color to really get the best results. But with digital, it's easy to switch, and you can play with tones and contrast. I will say blonde hair almost always moves over to black and white very nicely. And here I wanted to get some shots of these 2 granddaughters who are half sisters, and they share a close bond. They were both wearing the same little outfits. The mother had got the kind of cotton sweaters, and I shot a lot of shots, and that's what we were saying earlier. Sometimes you just have to try different things, say different things, get different expressions, and it was kind of working. I mean, you know, none of these are what I call the perfect shot, but then I got this shot, and this is one of my all-time favorites. In fact, their mother still has this as, I think, her lock screen on her phone. It pays to be patient to get shots like this. And while the shot on the left looks good in color, both girls, very tan, they're out in the summer, in their pool all summer, and the tones in the clothing are very nice in the background. I just like the way that it moved over to black and white. It's incredible tonal range. If you look from, like, the back of this chair is almost a true black, and the white in her hair is not blown out. It's got good definition, and the range of tones across their faces. You got good tonal range. And this was just, go ahead.
You get all that in your editing?
No, I didn't have to do much to this actually when I converted it. And if you look in the color shot, if you look over here at this shot, it's got very good tonal range, so it transferred well, and that's part of knowing, and it comes from experience, but it's part of knowing when a shot will move over to black and white. Is I think you have to avoid shots that have way too much contrast. So this has almost a black and almost true white, but it's really balanced. And again, as I mentioned, using a histogram when you're shooting, or even in the editing process, usually Lightroom, other programs, you can see a histogram, and you can kind of tweak it if you need to, so that you kind of pull in the tonal range on it.
Chris, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So when you do these portraits in studio like this, do you use a gray card for white balance?
No, well, maybe I'm pretty simple about some of this stuff. I just let the camera do the auto white balance. I usually, and I shoot in RAW, so especially for color, I can always go in and choose. Usually there'll be some camera specific choices. So for Canon, you got like vivid and portrait and landscape mode, and then there's just Adobe Color. And so or the auto white balance. And so I'll just shoot, unless it was really odd lighting and I was worried about it, like fluorescent or something, I might try and shoot under a different, but normally I find there's so much, when you shoot RAW, you can really play with the image.
Oh, let's shoot RAW. I mean, the definition of RAW is that your camera's not going to process the image.
Right.
It means your white balance in the camera doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's not going to process it. You can do whatever you want in the camera, and it's not going to do anything to the raw image.
And a lot of people,
But just keep in mind that when you're shooting RAW, the picture you see on your camera is a JPEG that is processed.
Yeah, you read my mind. I was just going to say that.
It is.
It's like a mini JPEG. So
Yeah, it is. So the camera, the back of the camera might look funny because the light might be funny, but when you get the raw picture out, it's going to be a raw image. You're going to have to process it.
Yeah.
So Chris,
yes.
Before you leave that one, how many lights did you use and how did you have them positioned?
Okay, well, I'll go back to it. It's going to be similar to what we're doing here. It's very simple. Obviously, my camera is straight on. There's a key light to my left, and if you look in her exposure on her eye, you can see the big bright reflection. And I use a reflector, and I have it in the next shot. It's like a collapsible, you kind of twist it and it folds up goes in a little bag, but it's silver on one side, white on the other. I usually just put that as a reflector just to soften the shadow side. And my lighting style in most of these portraits is what's called cross lighting. So the background light is on the opposite of the key light. So in this instance, key light's on my left, background light is on the right, and it's just skimming the background. So it's a little brighter on the right side. As you can see in here, it's a little brighter than it is over here. And so it's just two lights and a reflector. And I'll show you in this next shot. So this is my simple home studio setup. And you can see the big canvas background is on a PVC pipe. I own about a dozen light stands. That's something you can probably never have enough of. I use one key light on the subject, a background, and this is that reflector I'm talking about here. It's a round reflector. I just got it clipped onto a stand just to kick in, and you can see it's kicking in just a little bit of light on her face. And over here you can see the background light pointing back at the background, skimming across it.
That's a constant light, is it not, or is that a?
Well, these are my studio strobes. These are those Comet mono heads,
Okay.
But they have a modeling light. So, So the modeling light is a regular quartz, like a 200-watt quartz bulb, and that way you can see what your lighting is going to look like. But then when you fire the strobe, obviously, it's much brighter when the flash goes off.
So you put your background light off to one side, not directly behind them.
And you could do it behind in the old days, we used to do a little snoot or a spotlight on the background. I just happen to like this. I used to shoot a lot of portraits of like executives for annual reports, and things, and the corporate look. And a lot of times we would use this lighting. It's called cross lighting, or that's how we used to call it. And it just gives a nice look as long in your background. It helps if you don't have a lot of wrinkles because they'll be accentuated by the size and the light skimming like that. But you can tell this light, if you go out to this far left edge, it's probably about 3 or 4 stops darker to this right side. So it gives a nice gradation to the background. It takes a little while to shoot in my houses. I have to move all the furniture off to one side. But my wife loves the fact that it gives me an opportunity to really vacuum the carpets well before I move the furniture back.
Chris, can I ask
Yes.
a question?
Yes.
You have a pipe that's holding up the your background?
Well, it's a piece of PVC, this white up here,
Yeah.
that's like a piece of 4-inch PVC drain pipe. And what I do is, well, I haven't had to take it off for a long time, but years ago, I just put it on with some duct tape and I taped the canvas onto the thing. And I'll sit there and roll it up and kind of smooth it as I roll it to get the wrinkles out. And when it's done, it goes out. I have a long rack in my garage that I can put it outside to store it.
Oh, so you're actually using this to help store it also.
Yeah, it's because I don't want to fold it. I have the background behind me actually is a black fabric that's very easy to crunch up, and that's okay because that's the type of background material it is.
Now,
So
how are you attaching it to the poles though?
Okay, well, if you look here on the left, you'll see this silver stand. There's one on either side,
Yeah.
and I'm using, we call them C-stand arms. They're just basically, they're arms with a little adjuster thing that you could use for adjusting lighting and stuff, or holding something. And I just have 2 of them, but you could put a piece of pipe, like a background, usually background stands come with a rod or something. So anything would hold it. And you can see I've got a big clamp, and it's clamping it so it doesn't accidentally unroll anymore because the weight of the fabric could have it roll down. And you can tell this is 10 feet by about, I think it's 20, it's either 18 or 20 feet. So I can do full length adult portraits on this, and it's nice for just that kind of a look. It's not just a simple small background. It's quite, you can put, the picture I had of my 5 children, the black and white earlier, that was shot on that background, same background.
So when you said you have to do your living room, how much room do you actually need to set up a small studio in your house?
Well, we live in an older home in South Woodland Hills, so we don't have one of those big homes in the back of Kingwood. But it's, I'm probably I'm shooting this with a little wider angle lens, obviously, because I'm getting the up the chimney and out. This I don't know why I thought, oh, I'll shoot a shot of how I do my setup. This was done a couple of years ago, but I'm probably like about 10 feet from her and maybe 18 to 20 feet from the background.
Okay.
I usually, I hate to say it, sometimes I wish I'll be moving the light stands around and I'm like up against a couch that's, you can see over here on the right, the couch is against the wall and it gets a little tight. But you sort of just learn to work with what you have.
Mhm. Thank you.
Okay, that's okay. All right, so what can I say? But Emily has suddenly become a natural at posing. She was 9 years old here, and she really gave me a variety of poses. She was really having fun when we did this. She had recently lost several baby teeth, and her smile wasn't at its best. And I had her show a little more serious look. She actually looks a little sultry in a few of these shots, and she did very well for a 9-year-old. I often thought after I did these that she probably could have done a little card for a modeling agency maybe and gotten some work out of it. And I love the red top and the black leggings. It just gives her, with her hair, with that kind of soft blonde hair that she has.
Yeah, I found that keeping the mouth closed is better for kids that are missing teeth and having
Yes.
braces.
Yes, definitely. And as I said before, there's always a reward for giving me the good poses. This is Sarah at age 11, and we were doing this same photo shoot. She's moving away from the preteen stage into being a young adult. And sometimes kids put on a little weight as they go through the change of life here. And so I realized her face was looking a little round. And instead of, instead of having her look off to the side like that, I had her look into the camera more, and using her hand or her hand under her chin helps to just reduce the fullness in the face. It's just kind of another way to pose. And I like this version where I also desaturated. I basically just dialed the saturation down because I sort of wanted just to see what it would look like. And I don't know, just kind of like it. It has a not quite black and white, not quite color. So it just shows you can just, sometimes you just sit and edit, and it's like tuning in a TV. You just sort of decide what looks like right.
And if you have a full face, have the face turned toward the light so that the shady side has the most exposure to the camera, and that narrows the face a little bit too.
Good point. Good point. Changes in clothes and a few more funny expressions. We will often shoot for a few hours. If I'm going to go to all the trouble to set it up, we'll do things. And I think the kids, they actually have fun because they get to go change into a different outfit and get some shots. Here we have Kirsten, who's 15 now, and in this shot, and she's very proud of the fact that she took a class and learned how to do her own makeup. I like the initial look and the pose. Then I decided I would do somewhere I soften the skin tones and hair in the editing process. And I have a program I'm going to talk a little bit more about later on called Portrait Pro Studio. It just can give a little more muted look. It softens skin tones, the lips. It's just a different look. And so sometimes you just have to play in editing, as I said. And I like this shot. She has can-do attitude. And the shot gives me a feeling that she has a lot of self-confidence, which she sort of had at that point. It kind of comes and goes with a teenager. Okay, this is called beauty lighting. Well, that's what, I think they called it that in Hollywood or something. But it gives a very even and soft skin tones without many wrinkles. And of course, wrinkles generally aren't a problem for young kids, but it just gives a very pleasing look. I took these shots over at the kids' house, and I just set up a white sheet in their game room as a background, and I had them sit on like bar stools, and the light, the background's about 2 feet behind them, and they sat in front of it, and having them fairly close to the background with 2 lights on either side of the camera helped eliminate any shadows. It's just I think I used a white, I think it was this white piece of fabric similar to the black one that I have behind me here. And I just used one of my LED lights on either side with a large scrim for diffusion. This was before I got the softbox diffusers. And a scrim, for those of you that don't know, it's a term that comes from Hollywood, I guess. It's basically just a thin white translucent fabric. You can make your own. You can hang it up, or put it on, make a little frame out of wood or PVC pipe or something. These ones are these collapsible ones, which are nice because you just twist and fold and they go into a little bag, but they're translucent. And I have a picture of them coming up that I can show you a little closer about. Also, when you shoot with lights like this, these LED lights they're not particularly, super bright like a strobe or a flash. So it allows look at the pupil of their eyes. It's very bright and it's large, which really, it just gives a very nice, pleasing look. When you shoot with strobe, a lot of times those the pupils in the eye will stop down, way down. So here are 2 versions of one of the shots I took of Emily during this session. And again, these are these LED lights. There's no reason you couldn't use a couple of floodlights, just diffuse them a little bit. Or it's kind of hard to do natural lighting if you don't usually have 2 windows, but it doesn't have to be complicated or expensive. And the image on the left, I just did the basic editing in Adobe Lightroom. Mostly I was just cropping, adjusting white balance, usual sliders like exposure and highlights, shadows. And the second shot is just a copy of the first with its Lightroom corrections, and I took it into Portrait Pro Studio. And as you can see, it applied sort of what I call a little bit of a glamour look. It adjusted the skin tones, almost like I'd used some facial powder to remove any shiny spots. It adjusted the eyes. It brightened the whites in the eyes a little bit. It's just another look. You don't have to use a program like that, but I wanted to just explain that sometimes you get the look with the editing like this. And the beauty of using a program like this as a plugin is that it makes a copy of your original. You take it into the program, and when you're done and you save it, with most of these, they'll save right back into your Lightroom catalog. So it's there next to the original. So I can very easily, I can compare the two. Okay, last of the preteen shots. These shots were of Emily this summer, and she came over a few days, and she actually asked me to do some portraits. It was kind of funny because she said, "Grandpa, I brought over some nice outfits just in case you want to photograph me." So we set up, and again, you can see this is in the same living room as before when Emily was younger. But as you can see, I'm using these LED lights. You can see the barn doors are kind of wide open, so they're not enclosing the light. And these are the scrims I was talking about. They have little handles that you can hold them, or a place to attach them to a light stand. And you can tell they're softening the light. I shot this with my new Canon R, which when you're not looking through the viewfinder, it automatically goes to a live view mode because it's an electronic system, which makes it really easy to compose or look at your histogram, that kind of a thing. And I think I was using the 70 to 200 millimeter lens here. And we just shot a variety of shots. I will point out, it's interesting because I'm using you can tell on the eye here that the lights are on either side. But if you notice, this nice light on her hair is actually on either side of our fireplace. We have windows, and I guess some light was coming in, some daylight in it. Naturally, with my exposure, it just came in. I think it kind of added. Its color balance is pretty nice. So these all worked out pretty well. I would say that Emily didn't like any of these pictures. She says her forehead's too big. She only has one dimple. So she's 12, so she's become a teenager now. But I love the shots. We got a lot accomplished that day. Oh my God, teenagers. My grandson Lane, he asked me to take some portraits of him and his girlfriend, and they were both seniors in high school when I took these. And you may recognize the spot. It's River Grove Park. And this is on that little bridge that goes from the parking lot over to the soccer ball fields. And it was shot in November, just before Thanksgiving. So our trees have what little color that they usually get before the leaves fall off. And for these portraits, I used a Canon 5DS, which was that camera I mentioned earlier, large sensor, so super sharp images. And if you ever use a camera that has a large sensor, it's always good to have good sharp lenses, because if you don't have the best quality glass, it will be reflected in the image you take. So that's something to keep in mind. And this was along that little raised wooden walkway. It's along the waterfront when you first come into the first parking lot. And the light was soft and filtered by trees to give some good results. But all I can say is enjoy love while it's young and it lasts, because they broke up when they graduated from high school. So they're no longer a couple. I wonder what happened to these pictures, if they still have them. Here's a couple shots of Sarah taken this summer, East End Park. And I know it was mentioned earlier, using trees or the forest or something behind them and around them. And she's 14, so she's definitely a teenager now. And this was also a lens I forgot to mention. This was the Canon 24-105 that is specifically for my R camera mirrorless, and very nice sharp lens. Even though it's a f4.5, I shot these wide open, and it just gives a nice look with the woods in the background. We just walked around the forest and got some shots. We're getting into the home stretch. So are there any questions that I can answer? Okay.
So this one was all just natural lighting.
Yeah, and I didn't have a tripod. We went for a walk. And kind of like her younger sister, she said, "Oh, I've got a new top. I'll put it on." So I think they've kind of learned that they're going to get free from photographs, and they like it. So in fact, it was about 2 weeks ago they were over here, and I was showing them some of these, and they really liked seeing the pictures of them when they were little. Of course, that meant a lot to them. So.
And a
Chris,
picture
I have a
like
question.
Yes.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah. So the picture before this, with the boyfriend, girlfriend.
Yeah.
You used a pancake lens. What's a pancake
lens? Very good. That shows you're reading.
I'm trying to pay attention.
My wife, who does a lot of PowerPoint presentations, she also told me, she goes, now make sure you don't make the mistake of reading everything on your screen, let the people read while you read your notes. Anyway, okay. Canon makes a couple lenses. I don't know if Nikon or Sony or anyone else makes them, but they've come up with 2 or 3 that they call a pancake lens, literally because they're very short lenses. And that's how they're listed in their catalog. There's a 22 pancake lens and a 40, and it's just a short lens. I don't know about the optic principle, but it's able to be compacted. I just I carry it a lot because it's an easy, light little prime lens to use. I normally wouldn't recommend a 40 for a portrait, but as you can see, this is sort of it's not just the facial head and shoulders, it's showing more. And if you know that this little walkway or bridge, I'm like 4 feet away from them because the bridge is only so wide, and so I'm shooting them. And I just use that 40 millimeter lens, and it's not one I would normally use, and I didn't have it in my other lens photograph. But again, it's just a neat little lens, and it's as flat as a pancake. So
yeah, not much bigger than the lens cap.
Yeah, I mean, literally, I don't think it's more than about 3/4 of an inch in depth, and so it's just
it's a prime lens, right?
Yeah, and your normal 40 to 50 millimeters is going to be about 2 inches or so. So they do something now in the optics that they can make lenses shorter.
Chris?
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
noticed that in some of the very close-ups of the children that you had, you actually will cut off part of their fingers, or you'll cut off the elbows and stuff. Is it because you were just focusing on the face? And
Yeah, if it's not, depending on the pose, because head and shoulders shots are head and shoulders. You don't have to go all the way down. As for say shots like this, obviously it would look funny if you cropped them off, unless you really cropped them tight. So I think it just depends on the type of a shot, your portrait you're doing. And again, I'll often shoot wider, and then I'll make the adjustment to crop in when I'm in the editing section. Usually, I mean, obviously, I'm not going to shoot way back, but I usually will give enough room that I have some room to crop, just depending on how the subject is posed.
What % of crop are you normally doing? Is there like a 20% crop? I mean, you're taking the photo larger so that you can have more options. So when you bring it in, how much of your picture are you actually losing?
I guess I've never really thought about it, but maybe 25% or so. It's just, I'm usually including a little more because, for one thing, you have to keep in mind, and we still make prints sometimes to give to family members. If you're doing a 5x7, it's one crop. If you're doing an 8x10, it's going to be slightly different. Or now they have 8.5x11. We never had that, in the old days of photographic printing paper. 11x14 versus 16x20. So you need to give enough room that you can play with it, or if you're going to do a square, for instance. So I guess I never really, it's not a conscious thing for me. But I just try and back out a little. I almost always find I'm going to crop in a little. I very seldom will just go with out of the camera crop.
Okay.
And I typically don't, if I'm cropping for my visual, not for making a print, I typically don't care if it's suddenly a 7x5 or 8 or something. It's like in other words, I don't use, usually in the Lightroom cropping, it's constrained proportions where it looks like a little padlock. And when you do that and you change it, it's going to pull it in all at the same time. I don't really do that. I crop to what looks best for the image, unless I have to know I'm going to make a print of a certain size.
Okay.
Chris, on the picture before this one, do you know
Yes.
what the settings were on that of your granddaughter in the blue top?
Did we say these were all shot? Oh, sorry, I got that little thing to come up. Go away. These were all shot at about 100. They were all 3 were done because I did the maximum, and they were shot at f4.5. I didn't write down or keep track of what I did for the shutter speed, but I'm sure it was enough that I could hand hold it. And the ISO is definitely a good one. There wasn't much noise or anything in the shot. So for about at 4.5, it's wide open for that lens.
In ISO, you probably do 100 or 200?
Yeah, probably in the forest, it was probably like 200 to 300. I do find these newer cameras, I mean, I'm all for keeping your gear, and you don't have to upgrade with every model or something, but I do notice some of these newer sensors, the noise level is reduced even more, especially when you're in low light conditions. I just find they're making some great improvements over earlier models. Yeah, probably about maybe 300 for ISO. I find 400 even isn't too objectionable.
I found that if it gets below a 60th of a second, I can't hold it, and 60th is pushing the envelope.
Yeah, well, and the nice thing is, a lot of this lens particular has the image stabilization, and now a lot of the newest cameras are coming out with the in-camera stabilization, which is coupled with lens stabilization. And some of them are saying you can go like 8 stops, so you could be shooting down at like a half a second, and it will actually give you a fairly still image. So it's kind of interesting where it's going. It might be bad news for tripod companies. So.
For some
Okay.
reason, some of the notations on my screen are cut off, and that's why I was asking. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
No, that's okay. It was just, it was me.
Yeah. Okay. So formal portraiture for special occasions. This is just a little different look. These were taken at Mercer Arboretum. It's my granddaughter Amanda and her boyfriend dressed up for their senior prom. If you haven't been to Mercer, it's a great location, and they're fairly open to doing family portraits there. They ask you to check in, let them know at the front gate. And I think for hire photographers, they actually make you book a time slot because they can get quite busy around, homecoming and prom and graduation and stuff. And Amanda had actually done some modeling in her teenage years, so I had no trouble getting some good poses out of her. We moved around. I actually went out and scouted the location a couple days before to get a feel for the lighting and what could make some interesting backgrounds. There's a lot of things to choose from there, and it's a lot of open shade. There's a high canopy of trees. So these were again on a hazy kind of May is usually home or prom, and it was kind of a hazy day.
Some of those places will not allow you to bring in umbrellas. They have rules about it.
Umbrellas, and I didn't have it here. I know some places also tripods. I was using a tripod here, but I did see some people. You're right, but they had like a flash on, like one of those rigs that goes up above the camera. But here I was just shooting with available light. These were shot with this 5DS, and you can see I'm shooting wide open f1.2. ISO was 100 here, so it was quite a good bright open light, and we just got some nice portraits. Now, I will tell you that this was May, and it was very hot and humid. So if you're shooting outdoors, you might want to bring some towels. I tend to perspire when I'm working hard under stress, so it's a good idea to have a towel and some cold bottles of water. We did that for this shoot. The parents were nearby helping out. They were helping me carry my equipment around too. I've done a few senior portraits for 2 of my grandsons, Philip and Lane, and I was asked by Kirsten to do hers later this year. I usually like to cover the bases, so yeah, I'll shoot them with some controlled lighting, sort of portrait style stuff, and then we go outdoor to some outdoor locations. I ask them in advance to get some ideas of what they want in the way of pictures. Some kids are better than others. Quite often it's the parent who has to tell you what they want. And I scheduled some time for these shots, and I told Philip, I said, bring along a couple casual button-down shirts. And he showed up with this one green plaid shirt. So that was what we had for several of these shots. I think it was either his favorite shirt or it was the only button-down one he owns because he tends to wear t-shirts a lot. We went out later on location. This is the railroad tracks near Hamblin Road, and then down at that old bridge on 59 over the river. Great spots to shoot. And I found some props at Hobby Lobby. And props can help show something like the date and what the occasion is, make kind of a fun shot, play it up a little bit. And of course, goes without saying, be careful on railroad tracks. We parked nearby and just stepped on the tracks and took a few pictures. I know it can be dangerous, so do be careful. But this was all shot late afternoon lighting. So, I think it was because it was probably late April or May by the time we shot these. I think it was May. the sun is starting to go down fairly late in the afternoon. And then we shot, his mom wanted some cap and gown shots. Make sure when you do the cap and gown that you can see the year on the little tassel. Unfortunately, if you look close, you can see I didn't quite tuck his green shirt, his shirt in all the way. Okay, every teenager is different. My grandson Lane had played football throughout his career, so we made this a part of his portrait session. We went down to the Atascocita High School field, which was open on the day we went, and then again we shot in my house here. And then we shot at the bridge. I think it's a great location, especially for boys, because it has kind of a masculine feeling. Although my granddaughter has told me she wants to have her picture taken on this bridge, so I guess we'll be back there later this year. Quite often you get asked to do portraits with adults and their children. There's no set rules. They'll usually be whatever the adults want. And I did some family group portraits for Christmas card that my stepson and his wife wanted to send out later in the year. So, and we also did individual portraits of each of the children. And my stepson is a huge Raiders fan. They actually get their team shirts on each week in the fall just to watch the Raiders games on TV. He actually is a season ticket holder for the new stadium in Las Vegas, which he can't go to any of the games, sadly, this year. Emily is Daddy's little girl, and she's a diehard Raiders fan. And I usually explain to the parents that I want them to look at me. Don't worry about your child. I'll get the child to do something. Because if you don't do that, a lot of times the parents are looking at the kid wondering why they're not smiling, and suddenly the kid smiles and the parents aren't looking at you. So I try and get the parents to look at me, and then in this case, Emily gave me a great pose. I didn't even suggest this. I just think it's a cute pose. Here's just a couple of more examples that I shot. The one on the right here was actually my son Colin had come with his son Owen, who we saw earlier in the baby pictures. And he was attending a wedding for a fellow naval officer. And so he had his dress uniform. And I said, hey, let's get some shots. And then we just have the Lane and his stepmom, and then two of my children and granddaughter. We were just at a restaurant and went out on the deck at sunset and took some pictures. This was totally impromptu. No tripod for that lower left shot, just a grab shot with nice sunset lighting. And getting everybody to look into the camera, as it's always the challenge. This was up in Alaska, and here again, just shooting the family. It's really tough when you have a baby and a toddler, but I got the parents to look at me, and then I could focus on getting the look I wanted from the children. Okay, one last parent-child shot. This is Deirdre and Caitlin, and as you can see, Caitlin's growing up even more, and she wasn't cooperating that much. She was at an age where she didn't go through the terrible twos. She kind of went through the terrible fours. Mm-hmm. So we took a break. Mom took a walk to cool down because she had a very uncooperative daughter. And when she came back, I think Caitlin realized that she better give us some good poses. So in the end, we got this. And sometimes it just takes time. And taking a break, if you're not under a time constraint, is a really good way to just kind of get the shot you want. Okay, let's talk about editing a little bit and the editing process that I go through. A little water here.
Chris, before you start into the editing, this is
Yes.
a very amateur question, but I need to know it. On those outdoor pictures, what kind of settings do you use so that the sky is not blown out? I always have a problem with trying to get everything else in focus and the lighting good, and then my sky will be blown out. What do I need to do?
Well, if you look back, say at the shots I did back at the bridge,
Yeah.
that was late afternoon lighting, and I wasn't looking. Most of those, if you remember the shots of both of the grandsons taken on the bridge, and I'll use those as a reference because obviously every shot's different. And the sky was behind them. It was a little bit soft, overcast lighting, not a super blue sky, but also that was late in the afternoon. So there's not a lot of contrast. I think the thing you have to avoid is maybe shooting when there's too much of a bright sky behind somebody. That's when I would try and do, shots more like this, where, you can tell on my son's hair, there's some backlighting from the sun and the behind them, but they're looking at me and they're partly shaded. And we don't have any sky. I don't really, I'm going back. Yeah, so here, it's the time of day is a lot you have to choose from. Yeah, here's another example.
Clouds help a lot.
Yeah, yeah, and just not shoot, like, it always makes it challenging when I have to schedule these things because I'm watching the weather. This goes back to when I shot professionally. You know, we used to, before apps, we used to call a number with the FAA and get a flight report because that told us what the weather was going to be before we had apps for smartphones. But just knowing what the weather's going to be and getting, see, these are all shot, that's late afternoon light, so you don't have that bright sky blowing out in the background. And if it is just really bright, then I would suggest just trying to, you know, avoid it if possible. Does that sort of answer?
And have the light more from the side than
Yeah.
behind.
Yeah, or open shade is often nice for those shots. And then, like I said, you can often adjust the color balance or the white balance in your editing section. So quite often when I shoot, if the subject was shot under controlled lighting and exposure, you don't need to do much. I use Adobe Lightroom as my main editing program, and I have a 2-monitor setup for it. So my right monitor, which I am actually looking at right now, it's my main one, and the left one is secondary. Actually, on the left one in my home right now, I have this presentation going. So that's why I'm looking at that sometimes. But by doing it that way, I have usually my developed settings and everything are over here on the right monitor, but I have a grid pattern on the left and I can see different images. I can, oh, let's try this image. I can easily move around. You might not have 2 monitors, but it's a nice setup to do because you can compare shots pretty quickly and go back and forth. Okay, this is a screenshot of my editing steps for this image of Emily. The left side has the history panel, and as you can see, some of the steps I took to edit this shot. And the right side is the develop panel and in the basic group of adjustments. And it looks like I was looking at these adjustments. I seem to be doing a lot of cropping and spot removal. There wasn't much. If you see down at one of the first things I did, down here, that'll go away in a second, was I adjusted the highlights. I did some auto settings, and then I did cropping. I went through updating things and just trying to figure out what I wanted to do with it. I'm kind of funny about cropping. I'll sit and look at it and I'll go, oh, let's just change it a little bit. So a lot of times it's just a very minor change. Over here you can see, this is where I changed sort of a couple of settings. My tint was off a little bit. I felt on the white balance. And just some typical things that everybody would do, I think. Okay. Here we have another example. This is the one of Amanda and her boyfriend from their prom pictures. And so this is what I would see on my main monitor. I've got the film strip across the bottom. Sometimes I'll even lower that. You can hit the arrow button at the bottom and it'll drop. Because if I have the grid mode on the other screen, I don't really need the film strip as much, but it'll give me a little bigger image to look at and work on. And here you can see again, these are the steps I went through. In the case of this shot, I'd actually already processed this image sometime back, and I was fairly happy with it. I came back to it as I was putting this workshop together, and I noticed that the process version from Adobe had changed. And the way you can tell that is you'll get up here on your develop panel, it'll be like a little lightning bolt. And if you click on it, it'll say what process version it is and that there's a new one available. And I'll usually go with the new one. I think it's kind of like the recipe that Adobe writes for doing auto adjustments and stuff, and it will change. I think they're on process version 5 right now. So a lot of times I'll say, hey, let's see what it looks like. And in the case of this, I liked it. So then what I did was I made a virtual copy. If you look down on the left side, and what I did was, the reason I wanted to do that was for the presentation. I didn't want to change anything in my original editing, but I kind of wanted to re-edit it as a new version. So that's another thing you can do in Lightroom. You can make if you right click on the image, you can tell it, make a virtual copy. And basically it doesn't take up any space on your computer. It's just sort of a make-believe copy that you can make edits to, and then you can export it the way you want to, and you still have both versions. So that's something to consider. And as you can see, I did some adjusting blacks, whites, shadows, and things. Nothing major. But in this case, also, what I did was I then took it into Portrait Pro Studio as a plugin. And this is just sort of a before and after. The before is out of Lightroom on the left. The after is in this program that I use. It just, as you can see, it applied a little softening to the skin. Not that she has really any problems, but to me, it just gives a little more glamorous look. It put a little more, look at the eyes, the iris, the brown is a little brighter. Her teeth might be just a little whiter, and her lips are smoother. It just gives a little finishing touch. Now, you can do all of these things in programs like Photoshop has options to do this. And I know Luminar, some of the other programs. I just happened to have picked this program. I think I got a special one day and I bought it. And the nice thing is I don't have to do lots of settings. I can pretty much just go, oh, and you can kind of see over here on the right, it's got some choices: face sculpting, skin smoothing, you know, makeup, eyes, mouth, nose, hair. And you just decide what you want to do, and it has a set of sliders for each adjustment. It's real quick, so I use it. I think it's whatever you get used to. And that was the finished shot we got there. As I said, the nice thing is when I saved it, it went right back into my Lightroom catalog. Okay, one final thought. Things won't always go as planned. Just keep shooting. This was my attempt to make a perfect Christmas Day children's portrait. But Emily had a bit too much Christmas by the time we did this. And she skipped her nap earlier in the day. She probably had lots of candy from her Christmas stocking. Still, this shot of expressions on the siblings' faces is priceless. I just love the amused look that both boys have, the confused look on Sarah's face, and Kirsten's facepalm expression of disbelief. The shot actually got published. If you may have heard of a website called Awkward Family Photos, I submitted it there, and they chose it for a book they did of awkward family photos. And all the kids, they actually all remember this shot. They all like it. Even Emily likes it. So, like I said,
it's so cute and so memorable.
Yeah, you just keep shooting, and you know it was good with my wife. Actually, you know, this is one of those things. My wife and my daughter-in-law went out and bought these, and I can remember as a kid my parents doing this, and I hated those Christmas clothes because they're all scratchy and, you know, more than you want to wear. But we wanted to get this cute little Christmas outfit, and Emily just was not having any of it. I think we put her to bed after this, and the kids got to eat dessert or something like that. So,
Chris, I have noticed too, the same as you, that some of the poses of these expressions are not the smiles that we say, oh, smile or whatever. It's the frowns, it's the wails, it's the kid who got locked out from going outside and he's having a screaming fit by the window. I mean, those are the things that you look back and go, that's the real child.
Well, yeah, those are kids, like I said, kids being kids. You're not gonna, yeah, there's a time for those nice portraits. And a lot of times when I do them, either mom and dad have asked me to do them, or in some cases the kids now as they're teenagers, or else it's my wife would say, hey, you haven't done any pictures of the kids. My first wife, the mother of my 5 children, she was always lamenting. She said, it's like the cobbler's children who have no shoes, you know. So she was always after me because I was usually busy making a living. It was kind of hard to come home and set up or bring them to the studio, but we tried a couple times a year to get good pictures of them.
We went for a family portrait one time, and Todd was my son was into Calvin and Hobbes, and Calvin had this thing called Bambi eyes. So Todd gets into our family portrait and decides he's going to do the Bambi eyes look. And I was so irritated, but you know, it turned out to be one of my favorite pictures, you know.
Well, and I'll tell you something that years ago, when I was about 7 years old, my parents decided they would I had 3 siblings, so there were 4 children. And my parents decided that we would go after church and have a formal picture taken at Olin Mills. We all remember Olin Mills.
Yes.
And the reason was after church was we'd all be in our nice clothes. Well, my parents, our family was Roman Catholic, and it was back when you couldn't eat anything. And I had fainted at church because I was so hungry. And so this portrait, everybody's smiling nicely, and I'm standing there like a zombie because they made me stand up even though I was like sick to my stomach. So yeah, those are the pictures though that sometimes are very memorable. And you know, so my kids actually, or my daughter-in-law and her husband, have a big 11 by 14 of this up on their wall in their office because it's that and the jumping in the pool shot. So anyway, but okay, well, thank you for attending my workshop. Thanks to all my kids and grandkids for being models over the years. And if you have any other questions, you'll feel free to ask, or anything you want to talk about, it's okay. So that was my presentation on photographing children. I hope it is helpful. And there's a lot of things to consider. Like we said, natural light, if you can use it, is perfect. So
Yeah, Chris,
It was wonderful,
you
Chris.
put a lot of work
you.
in that, Chris. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Chris.
You
Yes.
have a
Well,
beautiful family. Thank you for
well,
sharing.
I think I learned, well, when I first did that food presentation back at the meeting, I wasn't quite aware about the thing with the way to do a presentation for our club. So now it's like I've become quite the master at Google Slides, and I actually had to talk to the 17-year-old granddaughter because they do those now for school. I was like, wow, you do these for school? You know, when I was a kid, the most you ever had to do was type a term paper or something, you know, on a typewriter. So.
Make a poster. You made a poster.
Yeah,
Oh,
right.
I paid my son one time if he would smile for a school photo. It was a mistake. It was a